What if I told you that some of the most iconic American products you've grown up with, cars, chocolate bars, even sports gear, aren't actually made in the United States anymore? That's right. For decades, you've been told these brands represent American grit, American innovation, and American pride. But here's the twist. Many of them now quietly roll off production lines in Canada. It's not something most people think about. When you buy a Ford SUV, bite into a Hershey's chocolate bar, or pull on a pair of Levi's jeans, you probably assume they're stamped with good old "Made in the USA." But in reality, more and more of these products are being built, brewed, or baked just across the border. Canada, America's closest neighbor and biggest trading partner, has become a surprisingly important hub for industries that once seemed inseparable from U.S. soil. From Ontario's booming auto plants to factories that churn out breakfast cereals, beer, and even iconic farm equipment, Canada has stepped into the role of America's workshop. And the best part? Most people have no idea. In this video, we're going to reveal 11 American products that are now proudly Canadian-made. Some will make sense, others will absolutely shock you. Along the way, we'll uncover why U.S. companies shifted production, how Canada benefits from it, and what this means for the idea of Made in America. So grab your coffee, maybe it's Canadian, too, and let's dive into a list that will make you look at your everyday purchases in a whole new light. The bigger picture: why American brands move to Canada. Before we dive into the products, it's worth asking a big question. Why would American companies move their production north of the border in the first place? The answer is layered, and it starts with economics. Labor costs in the U.S. have steadily climbed over the years, making it more expensive for companies to keep massive factories running at home. Canada, on the other hand, offers a mix of competitive wages, government incentives, and tax breaks that make the math work out in favor of relocation. For a corporation trying to cut costs without cutting corners, that's a very tempting equation. Then there's trade. Thanks to agreements like NAFTA and now USMCA, it's easier than ever for products to move back and forth between the two countries without heavy tariffs. This means a car built in Ontario can roll across the border into Michigan and be sold as easily as if it were made in Detroit. It's globalization, but on a continental scale. Logistics also play a big role. Canada shares the longest undefended border in the world with the U.S., making shipping fast and relatively inexpensive compared to outsourcing to Asia or Europe. Why wait weeks for a cargo ship from overseas when a truck can deliver products overnight from Ontario or Quebec? And let's not forget Canada's strengths in raw materials. With abundant supplies of aluminum, steel, and energy, plus a deep-rooted auto manufacturing industry in Ontario and Quebec, Canada already has the backbone for large-scale production. So when you put all of this together, the picture becomes clear. Canada isn't just America's friendly neighbor, it's America's workshop. Quietly, efficiently, and often unnoticed, Canadian factories have been fueling the American economy for decades. And the products we're about to explore prove just how interconnected these two nations really are. Product 1. Ford and General Motors vehicles. When you think of American cars, you probably picture Detroit, the Motor City, the beating heart of the auto industry. But here's a twist. Many of the vehicles cruising American highways today don't come from Michigan at all. They're built in Canada. Ontario, in particular, has become a powerhouse for auto manufacturing. Plants in Windsor and Oshawa have been producing cars and trucks for generations, and today they're responsible for some of the most recognizable models in the Ford and GM lineups. Vehicles like the Ford Edge, Lincoln Nautilus, and Chevrolet Equinox, cars you see every day in American driveways, roll off Canadian assembly lines before making their way south of the border. Why Canada? A few key reasons. First, the workforce. Ontario has a highly skilled pool of engineers, mechanics, and assembly line workers with decades of experience. Second, government support. Both provincial and federal programs have poured billions into keeping auto jobs in Canada, offering subsidies and incentives that make it hard for companies to say no. And finally, geography. Canadian plants sit right next to the U.S. auto belt, making it easy to ship finished cars into American dealerships. The Windsor plant, for example, has been a cornerstone of Ford's operations for over a century, while Oshawa was once one of GM's largest facilities outside the U.S. These plants don't just build cars, they sustain communities, employ thousands. and keep Canada deeply tied to America's car culture. So the next time someone brags about their all-American ride, check the sticker on the doorframe. There's a good chance that Made in Canada is stamped right there beside the VIN number. Product 2. Hershey's Chocolate. Nothing feels more American than unwrapping a chocolate bar at a baseball game, or grabbing a Hershey's Kiss on Valentine's Day. But what if I told you that a lot of the chocolate melting in your mouth actually comes from Canadian factories? For decades, the town of Smiths Falls, Ontario was home to one of Hershey's largest production plants. While operations shifted and expanded over the years, Canada has remained a vital part of Hershey's North American supply chain. And it's not just Hershey's. Other popular bars like Kit Kat, owned by Nestle globally, but produced under license in Canada, are manufactured north of the border and shipped into the US market. This means that many Americans enjoying their favorite sweets are, in fact, savoring Canadian-made chocolate. And if you've ever noticed a difference in taste, you're not imagining things. Canadian chocolate often has a creamier flavor profile, thanks to different dairy standards and milk content compared to the US. That subtle distinction means your Kit Kat or Hershey bar might taste just a little richer when it comes from Canada. The Smiths Falls factory itself became something of a legend, producing not just chocolate, but also local pride. Though Hershey's eventually closed the plant in 2008, production in other Canadian facilities continues to play a huge role in keeping America's sweet tooth satisfied. So while Hershey's may market itself as the all-American chocolate company, the reality is more complicated. Some of those iconic treats have taken a little detour through Canada before landing in your hands. Product 3. Craft beers and American beverages. Few things scream American like cracking open an ice-cold beer at a ball game, barbecue, or backyard party. But here's a frothy secret. A lot of that beer might actually be brewed in Canada. Take Molson Coors, for instance. While Coors Light and Molson Canadian are staples on both sides of the border, many of the Coors and Molson products sold in the US are brewed in Canadian facilities. Similarly, Budweiser, often marketed as the king of American beers, has a strong brewing presence in Canada, with massive operations in cities like Toronto and Montreal. Why would America's most patriotic drink turn to Canada? The answer is quality and cost. Canadian barley is prized for brewing, offering consistency and flavor that big beer brands can depend on. Combine that with slightly lower production costs and easy cross-border distribution, and Canada becomes a brewer's paradise. And here's a fun fact. Some of the all-American beer, poured at sports stadiums in the US, was actually brewed entirely in Canada. Imagine cheering for your hometown baseball team with a Budweiser in hand, only to find out it was brewed in Toronto. This blending of borders shows just how intertwined North America's beverage industry has become. The branding may scream stars and stripes, but the production story often tells a tale of maple leaves and Canadian barley fields. So next time you raise a glass of your favorite American lager, give a quiet toast to Canada. It might just be the country that brewed it. Product 4. Levi's Jeans and Apparel. Few clothing items scream American more than a pair of Levi's jeans. Worn by miners during the gold rush, adopted by cowboys, and later turned into a symbol of youth rebellion, Levi's have always been marketed as the very fabric of American identity. But here's the plot twist. Many of those iconic jeans Americans proudly wear aren't made in the US at all. They're stitched together in Canada. For decades, Levi's relied on a North American production network that extended beyond US borders. Before the brand shifted much of its operations to Asia in the late 1990s and 2000s, Canadian factories played a major role in producing denim for both Canadian and American markets. Some facilities, particularly in Quebec and Ontario, were responsible for cutting, sewing, and finishing the jeans that ended up in stores across the US. This outsourcing trend wasn't unique to Levi's. It was part of a broader shift in the apparel industry. As costs in the US climbed, brands began to lean on Canada and Mexico, where wages were lower but quality remained high, long before production spread to China, Bangladesh, and Vietnam. The cultural impact here is striking. Generations of Americans grew up believing their Levi's were as American as apple pie, when in reality, the denim might have been woven in Canada, stitched by Canadian workers, and only then sold as part of an all-American wardrobe. So the next time someone brags about their rugged, all-American Levi's, you can smile knowing there's a good chance those jeans were born north of the border. Product 5. John Deere Equipment. If there's one brand that symbolizes the heart of American farming, it's John Deere. The green and yellow tractors are practically an icon of rural America, representing independence, hard work, and the family farm. But here's the twist. Not all John Deere equipment comes from Iowa or Illinois. Some of it is built in Welland, Ontario, Canada. For years, the Welland plant produced industrial tractors and heavy machinery destined for U.S. farms. Many American farmers assumed their trusty Deere was made right at home, but in reality, it crossed the border before ever hitting the fields of corn or soybeans. It's a fascinating irony. The very machines helping American farmers grow American crops were themselves Canadian-made. In a way, it highlights how deeply intertwined the two countries' agricultural economies are. Without Canadian production, John Deere would have struggled to keep up with demand in the U.S. So next time you see a farmer plowing fields in Kansas or Nebraska, remember that all-American tractor may have Canadian roots. Literally. Product 6. Maple-tainted twist. Breakfast foods. Breakfast in America often starts with a bowl of cereal, quick, convenient, and nostalgic. But here's a little morning surprise. A lot of that cereal might have come from Canadian factories. Brands like Quaker Oats and General Mills have major production facilities in Canada that supply both Canadian and U.S. grocery stores. Even Kellogg's, famous for Frosted Flakes, Corn Flakes, and Fruit Loops, relied heavily on Canadian plants for decades. In fact, Kellogg's long-running London, Ontario factory pumped out millions of boxes of cereal each year, many of which ended up in U.S. kitchens. Why Canada? It's partly about raw ingredients. Canadian wheat, oats, and corn are high quality and abundant, making the supply chain simple and efficient. Combine that with Canada's strong food processing sector, and it makes perfect sense that your morning cereal might have been mixed, baked, and boxed north of the border. There's also a playful irony here. While Tony the Tiger is shouting, "They're great," in an American TV commercial, the flakes he's talking about may have been toasted in Ontario. You might even joke that those all-American cereals have a hint of Canadian maple in their DNA. So next time you pour yourself a bowl of Frosted Flakes, just know, you might be starting your day with a Canadian breakfast, even if you never leave your hometown. Product 7. Nike and Adidas Sports Gear. Sports are central to American culture, from Friday night football games to NBA showdowns. And with sports comes sportswear, brands like Nike and Adidas that dominate American closets. But here's a twist. Some of that gear isn't made in Asia or the US. It's actually produced in Canada. Canada has a strong tradition in sporting goods manufacturing, especially in hockey, a sport where the country is practically royalty. Brands like Bauer, which started in Ontario, have collaborated with giants like Nike to produce high-quality skates, pads, and uniforms. At one point, Nike even owned Bauer outright, making Canada the go-to location for some of its hockey operations. Beyond hockey, Canadian factories have produced sports apparel and footwear distributed throughout North America. The advantage? Proximity. Products can be shipped quickly to American retailers, and quality control stays high. The irony is striking. Imagine an American athlete, decked out head to toe in Nike, proudly believing they're repping an American-made brand, only to discover the stitching was done in a Canadian factory. Or picture a pair of Adidas shoes, marketed during the Super Bowl, but assembled in Montreal. This quiet crossover shows how sports, like so many other industries, don't really stop at the border. In fact, the next time you see an American star scoring a game-winning goal, they might just be doing it in gear that's stitched together north of the border. Product 8. Electronics and tech. When most people think of electronics, they picture Silicon Valley, sleek campuses, tech geniuses, and that all-important "Made in USA" label. But in reality, a surprising chunk of the tech Americans use every day has Canadian fingerprints all over it. Take BlackBerry, for example. Once a global smartphone leader, BlackBerry was proudly Canadian. While the brand itself faded from the phone market, its legacy left behind a robust tech ecosystem in Canada, one that U.S. companies like IBM, Dell, and HP have tapped into for manufacturing, testing, and research. Beyond devices, there's the invisible side of tech, data. A growing share of U.S. cloud storage and server infrastructure is hosted in Canadian facilities. Why? Canada offers stable regulations, advanced cybersecurity standards, and proximity to major US cities, all while keeping costs competitive. The result? That laptop, server, or cloud backup that feels all-American might actually be powered by Canadian know-how and Canadian facilities. In today's digital world, the label Made in USA is becoming less about borders and more about partnerships. Product 9. Tim Hortons crossover to America. Now here's one that's deliciously ironic. Tim Hortons is the definition of Canadian culture. Coffee, Timbits, and a place where hockey players and truck drivers alike grab breakfast. But step into a Tim Hortons in Buffalo, Detroit, or Columbus, and you'll notice something surprising. Those American locations often rely on Canadian production and supply chains. The coffee beans, donuts, and mixes that stock US Tim Hortons stores usually come straight from Canadian suppliers. So while you're sipping a double-double in Ohio, there's a good chance that cup has Canadian roots. And here's the twist within the twist. Tim Hortons may feel Canadian to its core, but it's actually owned by Restaurant Brands International, a holding company based in Miami. That means it's technically run by Americans, but fueled by Canadian production. So imagine this. Americans walk into Tim Hortons thinking they're tasting a piece of Canadian culture. Canadians see it as part of their identity. Meanwhile, the corporate headquarters is in Florida. Talk about a cross-border mashup. Product 10. Campbell's Soup and Food Brands. Few things feel more American than a warm bowl of Campbell's soup. The red and white can is iconic, immortalized by Andy Warhol, stocked in countless pantries, and synonymous with comfort food in the US. But here's the part most Americans don't realize. A lot of that soup is made in Canada. Campbell's operates major facilities in Toronto, producing not only soups, but also popular brands like Pepperidge Farm cookies and crackers. Those Canadian-made goods don't just stay north of the border. They're shipped right into American supermarkets, where shoppers assume they were made in New Jersey or Pennsylvania. The reason is simple: Canada's agricultural resources. Ontario and Quebec farms supply wheat, corn, and tomatoes of exceptional quality, making them ideal for soup bases and baked goods. By keeping production in Canada, Campbell's benefits from lower costs while still supplying its massive US customer base. It's almost poetic. An American family, huddled around the dinner table on a snowy night, opening a can of Campbell's chicken noodle soup, may unknowingly be enjoying a product born from Canadian fields and Canadian kitchens. So while Campbell's branding screams Americana, its reality tells a much more North American story. Product 11. Energy and raw materials turned American brands. Not every product is as obvious as a chocolate bar or a box of cereal. Some of the most essential American-made goods actually start as raw materials refined in Canada. Take aluminum and steel. Canada is one of the world's leading suppliers of both, and these materials often form the backbone of US manufacturing. The aluminum in your Budweiser can? Quite possibly smelted in Quebec. The steel in your Ford truck or GE appliance. It may have been rolled in a Canadian mill before being shipped to the US for assembly. Oil is another big one. Canadian crude, especially from Alberta, flows south through pipelines every single day, feeding American refineries. The gasoline powering cars in Texas or Illinois may well have started its journey under Canadian soil. Here's the kicker. Once these materials cross the border and are transformed into cars, appliances, or beer cans, they often get stamped, Made in USA. Technically, that's true. The final product was assembled there. But without Canadian resources, those American goods wouldn't exist. It's the ultimate reminder of how tightly the two economies are linked. Behind every all-American brand, there might be a Canadian mine, mill, or refinery quietly making it possible. Cultural reflection. Does Made in America still mean American? After going through this list, one big question remains. Does Made in America still mean what we think it does? The truth is, globalization has blurred the lines. Products today are rarely the work of a single country. They're the result of supply chains that cross borders, industries that overlap, and economies that depend on each other. And when it comes to Canada, that blurred line feels less distant. Unlike products shipped from factories in Asia or Europe, goods made in Canada don't feel foreign to most Americans. In fact, Made in Canada often carries a sense of trust and familiarity. The cultural values are similar, the quality standards are high, and the products roll across the border in a matter of hours, not weeks. There's also an emotional layer here. Buying American might still feel patriotic, but in many cases, you're also supporting Canadian workers, Canadian farmers, and Canadian industries. That's not a bad thing. It's a reminder of how intertwined our countries truly are. Think about it. Cars, chocolate bars, beer, jeans, even breakfast cereal, all everyday things Americans consume, often come with a hidden Canadian origin. It shows that Made in America is less about borders and more about a shared North American identity. At the end of the day, the US and Canada don't just share a border. They share an economy, a workforce, and in many ways, a future. Call to action. So there you have it, 11 products you probably thought were all American, but are in fact proudly made in Canada. From Ford's and Hershey's bars to Levi's jeans and even Campbell's soup. These examples show just how connected the US and Canada really are. The shock factor here isn't just that these products are Canadian-made. It's that the idea of Made in America has quietly evolved. The border might separate us on a map, but in reality, our economies are stitched together, just like a pair of Levi's jeans. Without Canada's contributions, many iconic American brands simply wouldn't be the same. And now, I want to hear from you. Which product on this list surprised you the most? Was it your car, your cereal, or maybe even your morning coffee? Drop your answer in the comments. I'll be reading them and replying to as many as I can. If you enjoyed this video and learned something new, make sure to hit that like button. Subscribe for more content like this, and share this video with a friend who still believes everything in their house is made in the USA. Trust me, they'll be just as surprised as you were. Thanks for watching, and remember, the next time you unwrap a chocolate bar, crack open a beer, or pour a bowl of cereal, you might just be tasting a little piece of Canada, too.